All right, well, welcome back from your cookie and coffee break, hopefully. You have enough sugar in you now. I wanted to start off by telling a little story. Anybody who knows me knows I like to tell stories. And the story I'd like to start with is one that is an urban legend. And that's a long time ago, there was a power plant failure in the early 1900s when these things were kind of new. You can all imagine like new technology, right? It always works for the first time. And this power plant failure had a big outage of the electricity in the city. And all these homes were without power. So the homes are without power, the businesses can't run, you got a lot of problems, right? So in walks Thomas Edison. They call him and say, who can solve this problem? And Thomas Edison comes in the door. He looks at the situation. He presses a button, and the whole thing just turns back on. And they're like, wow, you're amazing. You're amazing. You turned on all the power. Thank you so much. We couldn't figure out what was wrong. What's your bill? What are we going to charge? And he says, well, OK, let me write one up for you. So he writes up an invoice, hands it to them, and they say, wow, $10,000. That's a lot of money. You know, what's wrong with this, right? And he goes, hold on, let me revise that. And he revises the bill. And then he gives it back to him. And they say, OK, $9,999 for pressing the button, $1 for knowing which button to press. And this is so important in today's technology. How do you keep up with all these things? Because it's not about knowing that you can press the button. It's not about knowing which button to press. That's the key. So that's the story that we're going to go with today. My name is John Papa. I'm a web developer with Microsoft. And I'm a developer advocate. I'm a developer relations person. You can pick the title. But I do a lot of JavaScript, a lot of Node, a lot of full stack development. And I work with a lot of teams who have to fix problems. Who here has written code that always works? OK, Jem and Ryan. That's why they have the chairs, by the way. I'm not in that category. So today we're going to talk about how you can debug Node and Angular. And which button am I going to teach you to press? I'm going to teach you to press this button right here. So you can learn how to debug Node and Angular together. But first, let's understand what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to figure out how we can debug our Angular code and our Node code with the least amount of friction and resistance. If you remember, if you go back in the Wayback Machine, when Node first came out, debugging Node was painful at best. We used to do a lot of this from the terminal, in terminal and in emulator tools, using things that made it really quite difficult. And then we would send it off to Chrome version 2, maybe, and try to use that debugger with the terminal. It just wasn't easy. So we're going to learn how we can use VS Code to do this. Super simple these days. And I like to hand out the resources in front. So if you would like to take a quick shot of these, all the things you're going to see today, including the demos, the tutorial, how you can walk through doing all the things I'm going to do here, all the links are up here on the slide. I'll also show this again at the end in case you want to get it from there. So don't worry if you missed it. It's coming back. But let's start off with console.log. Hi, my name is John Papa, and I'm a console.log recovering addict. Nice to meet you. We all still use it, right? It's easy. It's so easy to do. It litters our code everywhere, though. There's even tools for CI processes to go and remove console logs. I admit, I have one of those. But there's ways around it, too. And we all do it. So there's nothing wrong with console.log. We still do it, but there's times when it becomes a pain. Right? You're writing console.log, you check a value, you get your whole thing running, you see the value, you're like, well, that's interesting, but that didn't really quite solve the problem. So how do I solve that problem? Well, let's stop the process, go change the console log, go back in, restart it, and it's kind of an iterative process. There are ways around it, and we can have fun with it. I like to do the captain's log. There's nothing better than just having a captain's log inside your project. So it's a great way to get around ESLint, by the way, because it doesn't like console. Hey, if you can't have fun at your job, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to talk about Node debugging. In VS Code, we can do a lot of cool things. We can debug Node pretty easily by hitting F5, or by hitting the buttons, or using our keyboards, or using our trackpads or mouse pads, whatever you want to use. And a couple things you can do here is you can start the debugger up. You can, of course, have your console logs, but you can also do things like inline breakpoints. So if you've got any kind of asynchronous processes, promises, RxJS observables, and you want to set breakpoints inside of those without changing your code, you can do that in here. You can also set breakpoints and conditional breakpoints and things called log points that we're going to see inside your code. and you can set up your debugging with 0 configuration. So who wants debugging without having to do anything? All right, I liked it. I think the rest of you are lying who didn't raise your hands. But we'll go with it. All right, so if we come over to this project, and this is the project for the link for the demos that's in the slides. This is a Angular project with Node. And is that a little dim? Maybe we can change the theme real quick to a light theme. Is that a little better in the back? There we go. So this project is an Angular project, and it's got a Node server in it. Here's the server folder right here. And inside there, we can see that we've got some routes and some services. We're hitting a Cosmos database in the cloud. And we're just using Mongoose, basically, in an API to talk to it. And then we've got our Angular project down here, just to show you we've got components, nothing hidden. Everything's good. Now, inside of our package.json, if you're like me, you probably have way too many scripts going on. And the ones that come out of the box with Angular are never quite enough for what you want to do. It's great for getting started, but once you get a Node project running, you probably have other scripts that start your project. And I've got a variety of them here. Hopefully you don't have as many as I do here, but I got a variety. The one I like to run is this one here called local proxy debug. So let's just look for a second at what that one does. I'm going to run concurrently another script called Npm Run Debug, and I'm going to run ngserve using a proxy to talk to my API. So my Node server is running on one port, and my Angular app's running on a different port. I want to be able to talk to each other. So what does Npm Run Debug do? At the bottom, I'm setting up some environment variables, and then I'm going to start the Node inspector with my server. This is just basic Node stuff that we can do. I could have typed all this from the command line if I wanted to, but who wants to do that? I know Jem and Ryan do, so I'll let them do that. So all I have to do is run my command down here at the bottom of the screen. Just to show you where that is, I'm running npm run local proxy debug. And when that app starts, notice the debugger starts automatically. VS Code is detecting that I ran with the Node Inspector protocol. It sees the source code. It starts my debugger up. You can see I've got my little commands. It's running the Angular app too. And you can see it's got my commands up here for the debugger. I can move my floating toolbar around if it's in my way. And if I go to the debug pane over here and I go to the breakpoints, you can see I've got breakpoints in my application right up and through here. So how did I get this to work? Notice at the bottom of the screen, making sure it's visible, there's something called auto attach is on. This is a setting in VS Code. If you do Node, you should turn this on, in my opinion. It automatically then says to VS Code, when you're doing Node and the inspector protocols run, automatically try to attach to this process if you can. You can disable it simply by clicking back on this again, and then it moves over here to the right for some weird reason, but then you can turn it back on and off. So how do you get to this? If you go to the settings in VS Code, so coming up here to the command palette, I'm going to type in settings like this, and I can go look for my user settings, or you can just hit command comma on your computer, and then you can search for the setting. So if you forget the name of the setting, this is good because it's actually using AI, which is cool. It's using AI search with Bing to go up into the cloud. Yes, it's Bing, I know. To search for anything you type in, to look for something that might match. So if I type in John Papa, it finds nothing because I don't exist. But if I type in auto attach, you'll see the first setting right there, debug node auto attach. And by default, this is usually off or disabled. But I can turn it on now, so now I can toggle it right inside of my status bar at the bottom of the screen. So cool. Once that's set, then I've got my debugger. I can go inside of my code. You can see this is set inside of my get heroes. If I flip over to my app and I go to my heroes page, notice I go to the heroes page, it's looking at my debugger already. I can see I've got nothing for heroes. I can walk through the code. I print out my captain's log down below. And if I hover over my heroes, I can look at all my hero information here. I can then look over here and look at my variables if I have any set. You can also use the Debug Console down below, and you can type in things like heroes and type in any statements that you like. So super easy to do. When you're ready, you just disconnect it by clicking the unplug button up at the top. So zero configuration, which is super nice, because in a lot of debugging tools, you have to set it up and tell it where the files are and tell it what protocol you're using, which port you're using. With this, it's using the most common conventions to help you out and get where you need to be. All right, so sometimes that's just not enough. Sometimes you have other things you want to accomplish. If we go inside of my package.json, I've got other things I want to do. Sometimes I run, you'll notice I've got a Docker command in there where I run Docker. I want to be able to debug in Docker. Can I do that? Yes, we're going to show you how to do that too. Can I debug using any NPM script that I want to? Yes. Can I map to TypeScript source files? Yes. You're like, OK, John, show me. So up here, I've got a couple of launch configuration options. We're going to show what these things look like. If you want more custom control, you'll notice we have a few options here. First, we have an option to launch Angular in Chrome. All you have to do is tell it where you're launching it and what folder do I find the source code in. The folder for the source code is important because that's how it's going to map what's in the browser over to VS Code. What if you just want to launch a server.js file? Simply just launch server.js here, and you can point to it, even pass environment variables if you want to. What if you want to run an NPM script? You just give it a name, you tell it you're going to run NPM, the name of the script is local proxy debug, and what port do you want to run on? That's the default Node inspector port we're going to use. And attaching to Node, a few extra lines in this one. For this one, we're going to have to map the local root of the code to the remote root. The remote root is where's the code stored inside the Docker container. That way it knows, OK, you're running in the browser on your machine, talking to a Docker container, and the files in there, and debugging those directly inside your VS Code on your local machine. So it's got to map all those three together. And that's what these do. So the workspace folder is your local, and then the remote root is inside of the Docker container. And then one of my favorites is relative file. This one is not documented, at least I couldn't find it. We really got to add this to the docs. Sometimes inside your app, you have an extra script where you need to set up a database and reconfigure it. For example, in my application, I've got this folder called meta. And there I've got a bunch of scripts where basically, you know, sometimes you're playing around with your data and you just need to reset your test database. I've got a script that does that. Well, when I wrote this, sometimes it didn't work. I don't want to set up NPM scripts to do this. I don't want somebody else really running this on me. So there's a really cool feature called relative file debugging, where you can say, whatever file I'm currently in, start the debugger there. Really, really useful. So let's try this one. I'm going to set a breakpoint right here. Just click in the gutter over here. Isn't gutter a weird name? Get your mind out of the gutter, John. So we click on the gutter over here, and then if I go back and look at that launch configuration, just to show you what it looks like, down here is the relative file. You simply give it a name, and the only thing that matters is this argument is an array which has a string called relative file. It's going to look up the relative file that you're currently in. So if I go back to that file, and I'm right in here, I can go to the debugger, I can click the green button, or I can hit F5, make sure that I selected launch relative file, and I run, and there I am, I'm debugging, right inside the file that I'm in. Word of caution, make sure you're in the right file before you do this. Sometimes you have more than one file open, because in VS Code you can have multiple files in multiple panes, like this. And if the wrong one is focused, it'll try to launch that other one. So once you have it in there, you can then walk through, just debug line by line, like this. And when you're ready, you can just hit let it run. And then let's let it finish. Good. Always dangerous to reset your database during a live demo. So that way, it ran through my script. I can debug it. I can see what's happening. Really easy to do. So launch relative file is a really, really useful one. If we go back into our code, into our launch configurations, another one I like to do is launch server.js. This one's the same thing as running it from an NPM script. It's a little more work, in my opinion, because now you have to set up like environment variables, and in any large applications, you'll have some of these things. So instead of doing this one, I like to just say, you know what? I've already done all the hard work with an NPM script. Let me just launch my NPM script, the same one we typed in manually before, and instead we'll use that to start our debugger up. So let's come back down to our terminal. We'll make sure we kill the other process. And I'll make sure, I get a little command, make sure there's no node processes running. That's good. And then my script is going to be running local proxy debug. So now here, I'm going to go back to my debug. Up here, I'm going to say launch via npm, because that's the name that's over on the right-hand side. And I'm going to press run. And when I do that, inside package.json, if we go back real quick to package.json, we'll see what that was doing is, again, running our node process and building our Angular server all at the same time, and then launching this inside the browser. And there's a delay here because my app is building. It's my Angular app. And you can see here, the app is working. And then here's my data coming across the wire for this one. Kill those guys. So that's the second way that we can run our debugger inside of our application. Now, I do a lot of Docker and containers. How many of you here use Docker containers today? Maybe a quarter of you, a third of you. How many of you think, keep your hand up if you think it's easy to debug Docker? Yeah. So when I got into Docker, this is the thing. This was the point where I said, I like Docker. I'm really, really big on being able to debug. Part of my job is to help people solve problems. They don't call me in when everything's working great. They call me when things are not going well. So with Docker, the hard part is everything's inside this container, which kind of means I can't see it, I can't touch it, I can't feel it. Well, there's some really cool tools that allow us to debug the container running our node processes and running our Angular apps. When I learned about these and saw how easy it was to do it, I'm like, OK, you mean I can see the files, I can edit the files, I can look at the logs, I can stream them, I can set breakpoints and change code? So basically, it's acting like it's not even in Docker. And they said, yes. I said, OK, this I got to try. So inside of my application, just to show we've got a container here, I have this Docker extension over here. It gives me a little whale. It's so cute. And I'm running my container. And when your container is running, it's green. When it's not, it's red. So I've got it running over here in VS Code. Some little things I can do is I can right-click on my container, and I can say, show logs, right here. When I do that, we're going to see that this application is running in the background. And there's the logs that are listening to it. And I believe it's running on port 7626. So let me go get that. There it is. We'll go to the heroes. I think I killed my data, by the way, when I ran that script. So I'm going to have to go rerun that script again real quick. This time I'm just going to run it right from here. Node, meta, create Vikings, yada, yada, yada. Too many scripts. Delete a database, create a database. It's hard to show data when you have no data, by the way. Hey, look at that. All right, now let's try it. Yay! Demo fix. So there's our application. If we go back to the terminal we were looking at right here, you can see that this is the Docker container. It streamed out the logs. It shows at the bottom we got 6 heroes successfully. That's the application that I was just running. Well, we saw that because we clicked on show logs. What if I want to see what files got put over in Docker? I can say attach the shell. Now I'm actually looking at the container. So I can say ls down here and look at all the files that I want to. I can cd into my server folder and look inside there. I can see I've got index.js. I can cat my index.js if I want to and look at my files. It's just a file system at this point. So there's nothing hidden at this point from those. Now, what if I want to debug this one? Remember back in my launch configuration. We'll go back into launch. I have a configuration here called attached to node. It's on port 9229. It's going to run localhost. That's where my app is running. I've got my workspace folder. Again, that's my local code. And then I've got my user source app. That's where we just put the shell over to so we could see how we could debug it there. And we're telling it to use the inspector protocol, which is the newer node debugging protocol. If you don't know what these settings are, here's a tip. See this big blue button in the bottom right-hand corner? That blue button? Click Add Configuration, and look at all the cool stuff you can do. You can debug with Chrome, Docker, Node, Electron, Gulp. Bunch of cool stuff out of the box. I basically just clicked on the attached to node Docker one to get this. And the only thing that I changed was the path right here to my application in the remote root, which you'll probably have to change too if you have it in a different place. So once you have that and your container is running, which is key, go into your debug panel. We'll select Docker attached to node. We'll click Run. because it's not going to start Docker. It says Docker's already running. I just want to go attach that process. You'll know when it's running because you get this toolbar up here, and I make my theme change the color at the bottom, so I know that the tool is in debug mode. And then I can go over and click on one of the breakpoints again if I want to. If I go back into my app and I refresh my heroes, I'm debugging Docker live inside my application. Easy enough? All right. So we walk through there. Now, something else that's really cool about this is, let's say you're inside your debugger, and this captain's log is cool, but maybe I really wanted to look at, like, I just want to see, there's like 50 heroes. I want to see the first hero in the array. There's too much mess in there. I don't want to stop the container, change my code in my app, rebuild the container, deploy the image, start the container up, and do this all again, just so I can change the console log. See this weird icon over here? It's like you're playing, poker. So you've got the diamond. This is a log point. I'm going to remove it. All you have to do is right-click on it, choose Add Log Point in the gutter instead of a breakpoint. And the log point says, you can log out any message that you want. And it gives you a hint. Expressions can be interpolated. So we can say heroes, and it gives me IntelliSense like this. Give me the 0th array element like that. And then the next time that I run through my code, over here, and I refresh, and I walk through, you'll see down here I have my 6 heroes, and then notice I've got hero aslog right there. That is the 0th element of the array. So it's a great way you can add a console log on the fly without changing your code, which is super cool because then you don't have to worry about doing captain's log or ESLint telling you to get rid of them later, and you don't have to rebuild your code to get there either. Then when you're done, you just disconnect from Docker, and the Docker app is still running. You're just no longer debugging to that Docker app. Cool. If you didn't catch everything I did, don't worry. It's all inside the slides, which I'll share, and it's all up on the README of the demo as well, which I'll share the link to. Quickly, there's a 20-second GIF for each one of these also if you want to watch through the slides how this works. If you want to auto-attach, you simply go to the auto-attach settings inside of VS Code, turn it on, run your script, make sure you've got the inspector protocol set up, and it will set your breakpoints for you. Pretty easy to do. Another option is debugging relative files. You just focus in a file, and then you go to your debug window and start the debugger. And once you set a breakpoint, it'll hit that breakpoint, and then you can debug right inside your files as well. Docker is pretty easy. Once you have your container up and running, you just set up your launch configuration for Docker. You press that big blue button that we looked at, and then you set up the launch configuration. You start the debugger by attaching to Node. You go hit your application, maybe through the browser like this, and then it will hit any breakpoints that you happen to have. And if you want to set up logging with log points without console log, you can do that too. So you can console log without a console log, without any code changes, simply by clicking in the gutter and setting your little diamond-shaped breakpoint in the gutter of the window there. You can also debug with Angular pretty easily. All you have to do with Angular is hit Add Configuration, and it adds the configuration for you. And then you just simply have to press Run. It will launch your application. It will connect to it, and you can debug your Angular code and even set inline breakpoints. Notice here, I've got a subscription to an observable, and then I'm setting a breakpoint on the heroes to inspect the heroes as they come back from the Angular application. So if you don't want to debug inside of Chrome, and that's a great tool, I use most of my client-side debugging in there. Sometimes you want to stay in the same tool. VS Code lets you do this. The only additional thing you need for this to work is there's a Chrome debugger extension for VS Code, which is downloaded something like 10 million times. It's really, really popular. It's very well done, and it works great inside of VS Code for Angular applications. Good news is, anything you want to do in VS Code, there's an extension for it. You don't like the theme, pick another one. You don't like the JavaScript, you like Python, you like Go, there's an extension for it. So you can go check out the marketplace and look for really cool extensions out there. If you're an Angular developer, like we all are, the best extension you should have is the Angular language service. If you don't know about that extension, absolutely get it. It lights up Angular inside of VS Code in a great way. It lets you do things inside the templates to talk back to your TypeScript. Super valuable. And just in hindsight here, to recap, debugging. We talked about auto-attach, how we can use relative files. You can launch a server.js file, your NPM scripts. You can do Docker debugging, log points. You can even do inline breakpoints or columnar breakpoints. And you can do Angular debugging with the Chrome debugging extension. And here, one last time, are the extensions and the links for your application that you can run. The last one is the tutorial that I just went through. And if you do the demo and the README, it shows you all the steps that I ran through today to share with you. So remember, it's not knowing about how to debug or where to debug or where your code is and how to set things up. It's about knowing which button to press. You press that green button, and most of the time, it's just going to work. So give it a shot. And if you have any questions, come ask me and talk to me after the breaks. Be happy to hear your feedback. Thank you.
So I'm such a newbie to code, like VS Code. I realized that I'm not taking advantage of like any of those features, just like a small portion of it. So that was amazing to now actually learn more things.
I switched from VS Code, from Sublime to VS Code. I was like a hater for such a long time. Like, I don't need an IDE. That's way too much work. It's too complicated. Sublime all day. And I switched, and I'm not going back. IDEs are where it's at. It's so much easier. But like, honestly, before John gets up here, so I can like, throw some shade on him, I don't like John, because had I seen this talk before, it would have saved me hours, like hours and hours of configuration and debugging. John, where were you before?
Well, you needed to teach us this VS Code.
It's a good question, man. Oh.
I guess you don't even need a mic.
I don't need a mic.
Yeah.
I have a mic.
Yeah, the question is, where have you been all of my life? You could have saved me hours and hours and hours.
I was just thinking that last night, sitting in bed watching Netflix. I'm like, where's Jen been all my life?
Remember, if you like a show on Netflix, that was all me. If you don't like a show, there's a different team.
Yeah, it's always a different team.
Gotcha.
We'll take credit for the good. Yeah. And actually, last year we actually got to have you on stage with us to do a Front End Happy Hour podcast. You were our guest on. That was awesome having you on. We talked about Angular there as well. So.
Yeah, with April and Simone and some others.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, and Simona's on your team, so that was good too.
And then you two were on a podcast as well, right?
Yeah, John actually has his own podcast too. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I have a podcast called Real Talk JavaScript. The idea is not to talk about cool, new, shiny features, but to talk to people who actually build real apps, which we had you on anyway, Brian.
Yeah, I'm like, I build real apps? I don't know about that.
But yeah,
you had me on.
It was a lot of fun just to hear about real stories, because we always hear about the things that work great, but we like to talk about the things that sometimes are more challenging.
Well, thanks so much for your talk. I'm like I said, I've learned a ton just on VS Code, and I need to step up my game a bit now. But now I know how to do it, and now you've helped Jem maybe a little bit.
Cool. Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
John.
Hey, man.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you.